They say the wind on Blackwood Hill doesn't just howl, it whispers. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the voices of those who never came back. Daniel adjusted the camera strap on his shoulder and took a deep breath. The road leading up to Blackwood Hill was barely visible under the thick fog rolling in from the forest. The locals in the nearby town had warned him not to go there after dark, but he had ignored them. Just another urban legend, he muttered to himself, tightening his grip on the flashlight. He was a travel vlogger, always in search of eerie, abandoned places to explore. Blackwood Manor, an ancient mansion sitting atop the hill, had been abandoned for over a century. The last known occupants, the Blackwood family, had vanished overnight, leaving no trace behind. Some said the house was cursed. Others believed something in the forest had taken them. Either way, Daniel knew this would make for a perfect horror documentary. The wind howled through the twisted branches, carrying an eerie melody with it. But there was something else in the wind. Whispers. He stopped in his tracks, his heartbeat quickening. He shone his flashlight into the trees, but the mist was too thick. The whispering continued, just out of reach, like voices speaking from behind a veil. Ignoring the uneasy feeling gnawing at his gut, he pressed on. Halfway up, he came across an old wooden sign, its letters barely legible under years of decay. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor. Stay silent." A strange chill ran down his spine. "Why silent?" he muttered, running his fingers over the carved letters. A rustling sound from behind made him whip around. The trees stood motionless. The fog swirled around him, thick and suffocating. He swallowed hard and continued walking. The mansion. The Blackwood Manor loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the starless sky. The iron gates were rusted, barely clinging to their hinges. As he pushed them open, they let out a spine-chilling creak that echoed into the emptiness. The mansion's door stood slightly ajar, as if expecting him. He hesitated before stepping inside. The moment he did, a deep silence settled around him. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing dust-covered furniture draped in white sheets. A grand chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled with age. The wooden floor creaked under his weight. A massive painting dominated the far wall. It depicted the Blackwood family, father, mother, and a little girl standing between them. Their eyes, something about them was off. They weren't just painted. They looked real, as if watching him. Daniel exhaled sharply. Creepy as hell. As he moved forward, his foot landed on something brittle. He looked down and recoiled. Bones, small, scattered animal bones, littered the floor. Then, the door slammed shut behind him. His breath hitched. He spun around, shining his flashlight at the door. There was no wind inside, no reason for it to close on its own. The whispers returned. This time, they were inside the mansion. The upstairs hallway. A staircase led to the upper floor, its railing coated in dust. As Daniel ascended, each step groaned like a dying breath. The whispers grew louder. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly open. From within, something creaked. A rocking chair? His flashlight flickered. Not now, he whispered, tapping it. He pushed open the door, revealing a child's bedroom frozen in time. A tiny bed, an old rocking chair, and a doll sitting on the windowsill. The chair moved ever so slightly, as if someone had just been there. The doll's head was tilted unnaturally, its glass eyes reflecting his flashlight. Then the whispers stopped. Silence. A breath hit the back of his neck. Cold. Icy. He spun around. Nothing. His camera was still rolling, the red light blinking. He took a shaky breath. Okay, enough of this. As he turned to leave, the doll fell off the windowsill. The moment it hit the floor, the door slammed shut. The air turned frigid. His breath came out in misty puffs. Then he saw it, the mirror. And the reflection that wasn't his. The reflection. A little girl stood behind him. Pale skin, hollow black eyes, a torn nightgown soaked in something dark. She didn't move, didn't blink. His body refused to move. Then her lips parted. You shouldn't have come. A hand gripped his shoulder. Ice-cold fingers dug into his flesh. Daniel screamed. The lights flickered wildly. The walls groaned. The whispers erupted into wails. His camera crashed to the floor. Darkness swallowed him whole. The aftermath. The next morning, a group of hikers found Daniel's camera at the base of Blackwood Hill. The screen was cracked, but the last recorded footage was intact. In the video, Daniel stood in front of Blackwood Manor's gates, grinning at the camera. This is it, guys. Blackwood Manor. They say it's haunted, but I don't believe in ghosts. Then, static. A faint whisper broke through. Welcome to Blackwood Manor. Stay silent. The screen went black. Daniel was never found. But on quiet nights, when the wind blows just right, the town still hears the whispers from Blackwood Hill. Some say it's the wind. Others know better. The vanishing trail of Ravenwood Hill. They say the trail up Ravenwood Hill disappears at night. And if you're still on it when the last light fades, so do you. Ian adjusted the camera strap on his shoulder, taking a deep breath as he glanced up at the steep trail winding toward the peak. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, but something about it felt unnatural. The villagers at the base of the hill had warned him, don't stay after sunset. If the mist comes, turn back. And whatever you do, never follow the voices. Superstitions. Myths. He had heard similar stories before. As a travel vlogger, he sought out haunted places, abandoned buildings, and eerie legends to uncover the truth, or at least create entertaining content for his followers. Ravenwood Hill was his next challenge. He checked his watch. 5:30 p.m. Sunset was an hour away. That gave him enough time to reach the abandoned rest house at the top, record a few segments, and head back down before dark. Or so he thought. The shifting path. The climb was exhausting. The higher he went, the quieter it became. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of his boots on the gravel path. Then something changed. He turned to glance back at the trail below, expecting to see the familiar winding path leading down to the village. But it was gone. His stomach lurched. The path behind him had vanished, swallowed by the dense fog creeping up the hill. This isn't possible, he muttered, turning forward. The trail ahead had changed too. Instead of leading to the peak, it now curved sharply to the right into the dark forest. Ian's breath quickened. He reached into his backpack for his compass. The needle spun wildly before stopping, pointing toward the forest. Then the whispers began. The voice in the fog soft, faint, like breath against the wind. Ian, come this way. His body stiffened. The voice was close, too close. He swung his flashlight toward the trees. Nothing, just swirling mist weaving between the trunks like ghostly fingers. Then, ahead on the new path, a figure emerged. A young woman. She stood barefoot on the dirt, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders. Her white dress clung to her thin frame, stained with something dark. Her lips moved. This way, you're almost there. Ian's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He blinked. She was suddenly right in front of him. The rest house. Ian gasped, stumbling backward. His vision blurred, and for a moment, darkness swallowed everything. When he opened his eyes, he was standing somewhere else, the abandoned rest house. But how? Had he blacked out? The structure loomed before him, its wooden walls warped with age, its windows dark and empty. The heavy air carried the scent of damp rot. His flashlight flickered as he stepped inside. The wooden floor creaked beneath his weight. He panned his camera across the room. The walls were lined with old photographs, faded black and white images of people. Their faces were expressionless. But their eyes, they weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at him. A shiver ran down his spine. Then he saw it. A photograph in the center of the wall. His own face stared back at him. The forgotten truth. His pulse thundered in his ears. This was impossible. This place had been abandoned for decades. How was his picture here? The whispers grew louder, the walls groaned, the air turned ice cold. Then, a creaking sound behind him. Ian turned slowly. The woman from the forest stood in the doorway. But now her face wasn't human. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, her hollow black eyes fixed on him. Her skin was too pale, too tight over her bones. She raised a hand. You've been here before. Ian staggered back, shaking his head. No, I haven't. But then, the memories crashed into him. The last time he had climbed this hill. The same whispers, the same woman, the same horror. And then, nothing. Because he had never come back. Because he had never left. The vanishing. The mist slithered through the doorway, curling around his ankles. The whispers turned into distorted wails. Ian screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. His body felt weightless, dissolving like mist in the wind. The last thing he saw was his photograph. Fighting, like he had never existed. The next morning, the villagers found Ian's camera at the base of the hill. His footage was intact. The final recording showed him standing in front of the Ravenwood Trail, smiling at the camera. "This is it, guys. Ravenwood Hill. They say people vanish here, but I don't believe in ghosts." Then, static. A faint whisper broke through. "Don't follow the voices." The screen went black. Ian was never found, but the whispers on Ravenwood Hill remained, waiting for the next traveler to answer their call. The cursed cabin of Hollow Peak. They say no one stays a night in the cabin on Hollow Peak and lives to tell the tale. The ones who do aren't the same anymore. The freezing wind howled through the towering pine trees as Zion adjusted his backpack and checked his map. The trail leading up to Hollow Peak was rough, barely visible under the thick fog rolling in. It was the perfect setting. Zion was a horror vlogger, always in search of abandoned, eerie locations to explore. His followers thrived on fear, and he made sure to deliver. The Hollow Peak cabin was infamous. Travelers who stayed there either disappeared or came back, changed. Locals had warned him. The cabin is cursed. It calls to those who seek it. It doesn't let you leave. But Zion had heard such warnings before, and they only fueled his excitement. The sky darkened as he reached the clearing. The cabin stood there, its wooden structure rotting, its windows black voids. A single lantern flickered on the porch. His chest tightened. Who had lit it? He turned on his camera. "All right, guys. I made it to the legendary Hollow Peak cabin. Let's see if the stories are true." He stepped onto the creaking porch and pushed open the door. It was unlocked. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something metallic, like rust. The living room was eerily intact, as if someone had just been there. A wooden table stood in the center, covered in dust, with a single chair pulled out. On the far wall, a large mirror reflected the dim light of his flashlight. Zion panned his camera around. "This place is unsettling." Then, something moved. He turned sharply. The chair at the table was now pushed in. His grip tightened on the camera. He hadn't heard it move. A gust of wind rattled the windows. Then, a whisper. Faint, distant. "You came back." His blood ran cold. He swung his flashlight around. "Who's there?" Silence. He exhaled shakily and checked his watch. 9:45 p.m. He just had to last till morning. The mirror. He explored further, finding an old bedroom with a rusted bed frame and torn curtains. The walls were covered in strange symbols, scratched deep into the wood. But the strangest thing was the mirror. It stood against the far wall, identical to the one in the living room. The glass was cloudy, as if something on the other side was trying to seep through. As he approached, his reflection wavered. Then, for a split second, it wasn't his reflection. The face looking back at him had hollow black eyes. Zion stumbled back, heart hammering. The mirror now showed only his terrified face. A sharp knock echoed from the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. He wasn't alone. The visitors, his hands trembled as he pointed his camera toward the door. "Guys, this is not staged. Something just knocked." Another knock, louder. Then the door creaked open on its own. Cold air rushed inside, carrying the scent of damp earth. The porch was empty, but footprints led inside. Wet, muddy footprints, appearing one by one, moving toward him. Zion backed away, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "No, this isn't real." A whisper brushed against his ear. "We've been waiting." The door slammed shut. The truth of the cabin. Zion bolted to the bedroom and locked the door. His mind raced. What was happening? The stories, the warnings, were they real? He replayed his footage, his hands shaking. Then his blood froze. In the reflection of the living room mirror, standing behind him, was a shadowy figure. Tall, motionless, watching. But he had seen nothing when recording. His stomach twisted. He had to get out. He grabbed his bag and turned toward the window. And saw himself. His own reflection in the bedroom mirror. But it wasn't right. The other him smiled and whispered, "You never left." The other Zion's body locked in place as his reflection stepped forward, not in the mirror, into the room. It moved like him, breathed like him, but the eyes were wrong. Too dark, too empty. The whispers turned into laughter. The walls groaned. The mirror behind him cracked. Zion screamed, stumbling back. "No, this isn't real." The other him tilted its head. It was real the first time. Memories flooded his mind. This wasn't his first visit. He had come before. He had never left. The escape that never was. Zion clawed at the door and stumbled into the living room. The footprints were everywhere now, circling him. The walls pulsed as if the cabin itself was breathing. The mirror in the living room was different now. It no longer showed the cabin, it showed the outside. The forest. The path back to safety. It was his only way out. A deep voice echoed from the walls. Leave if you can. Zion didn't hesitate. He ran straight at the mirror and jumped through. The morning after sunlight warmed his face. Birds chirped. The scent of pine filled the air. He was outside. He had made it. Laughing breathlessly, he grabbed his camera. Guys, I don't know what happened, but I think I survived the Hollow Peak cabin. The screen showed static. Then, his own voice from last night. This isn't real. His stomach turned. He flipped the camera to selfie mode and dropped it. His reflection in the screen didn't match him. The other Zion smiled and whispered, "You never left."